The Hours. At just under 2 hours, this 2002 film achingly cuts between three stories, which, while barely giving us context, each story takes place in the span of one day and has nobody really in common save two, which really only makes two of the stories part of the same story, not unlike how Mrs. Dalloway is a combination of two short stories by Virginia Woolf, who is shown in one of the three stories, writing Mrs. Dalloway. Here is the unfortunate thing about The Hours. It's not so much of a story about women as much as it's about mental illness. We have to wait halfway through the film to find out why Virginia Woolf is living on the lush estate. I mean, she lives in a manor home with servants, has a garden so sunny and gorgeous that I thought it was a country estate, even though it's actually in the middle of the town of Richmond. As someone who's had to deal with the mentally ill from time to time, I'm not sure how this film even does justice to mental illness, let alone to Woolf, who's actually one of my favorite authors. The film seems to be more about women living in a man's world. Woolf's husband, Leonard, was upset after Virginia tried to kill herself on two separate occasions. Meanwhile, she hides a same-sex relationship with friend Vanessa Bell, played by Miranda Richardson. Leonard moved them out to Richmond to keep Virginia from the stresses of the city that seemed to cause her depression. After Leonard consents to move back to London, she kills herself anyway. It's made pretty clear that he's supposed to be trying to control her, but what I see is a husband who loves his wife and encourages her to pursue her passions, not to destroy herself. Contrastingly, Laura Brown is married to her husband Dan Brown with a second child on the way. They married seemingly because he wanted to marry her and not reciprocating. She kisses her friend Kitty, who ignores it happening, as later Laura decides to leave Dan and move to Canada. Her son, Richie, whom she calls Bud, knows that something is up with her, and this leads us into our third story, 50 years later. Richie is a successful poet and author who, like Woolf, is plagued by mental illness, the same as Virginia and Leonard describe it. After years of getting worse and worse, he lives alone in a run-down apartment with his former college lover and editor, Clarissa, coming to visit him frequently to check on him. On one level, the film says that women need to not live with men at all. I'm serious. Woolf lives in a time and place where even with the vote, women are seeking more rights, and Virginia is an icon of that movement. But it's lazy writing to indicate that an oppressive husband drove her to desperation. It's not even shown that Woolf killed herself, which in the context of the historical fact, she did. More so, it's indicated that she simply left her husband to go and be with Vanessa. A film like this would make Pat Robertson go crazy, as it indulges his conspiracy theories about feminism making women want to leave their husbands, kill their children, become lesbians, and practice witchcraft. Rather, this film seems to suggest that women are happier with daughters away from all men. Watch the film and see for yourself. It doesn't honor Woolf's contributions to the world of feminism or the battle that she had with depression. It just makes her look like she's trying to get out of a cage she was placed in by a man. And this is represented as Woolf lies there looking a dead bird in the eye, as if to say that she sees herself in the bird. But on an entirely different level, The Hours is about battling mental illness, as if to say that living with it only ends in self-destruction. We see this in Richard, Virginia, and Laura, except Laura isn't mentally ill so much as she's closeted. Wikipedia seems to back me up on the point that all of these women are queer in some way, Virginia, Laura, and Clarissa. The film doesn't reflect the author's original suggestion that mental illness that isn't a harm to oneself or others can be a valid difference of perspective. The filmmakers don't give us that at all and make it seem like mental illness will only destroy you and that it's all the fault of some man. For Laura, it's depicted as a rising pool of water. For Richard, it's just a fall out of his window. And they don't even hide it. They show him falling from several floors up, but this is actually shown as helping Clarissa, as it frees her from having to take care of Richard any further. And again, this just brings us back to the idea that life without men is somehow better. So how does The Hours stack up overall? Frankly, I'd heard the music by Phillip Glass plenty of times and thought it was nice, but in the context of film, it just seems to reflect the decline of mental illness and depression. Contrastingly, we get an unadulterated push for Valerie Solanas' ideal world in her perversion of feminism. This film is often held up as a feminist film because it shows an oppressive environment for women in the 20s and the American post-World War II era. I think it's badly adapted from the book, and if it weren't for good casting and music direction, this film would have been a complete flop. From the beginning, it feels like the editor hates you as we cut back and forth between one story and another. The image of a flower in a vase being shoved at you. Could this be a metaphor for a woman being forced to live under a man's dominant will? The cuts pass so quickly that I want the opening to go slower. Meanwhile, the pacing of the rest of the film is so slow that I want those parts to speed up. Instead, we get a lot of inane dialogue and watch male characters that are in touch with the women they love suffer right along with those women. With the exception of Dan, who's aloof to his wife's unhappiness, the men in his world actually do care a lot about what their wives, mothers, and exes go through. They want to do everything they can to keep them happy and in their lives. Laura seems to feel nothing for the fact that her abandonment of Richard made him depressed and self-destructive. On a lighter note, Phillip Glass also provided the score for The Illusionist, which is one of my all-time favorite movies. In contrast, it's better made, better edited, better performed, has a better resolution, and isn't a story of female queer self-discovery or a story of a love triangle between two stage magicians like The Prestige. The director of The Hours, Stephen Daldry, has gone on to do good stuff, while writer David Hare has not gone on to do anything as successful. My main foe in this film, editor Peter Boyle, has actually edited one film that I remember liking, Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, and others we can all remember hating, Morons from Outer Space, Waterworld, The Postman, Tristan and Isolde, 1408, and the recent remake of The Thing. Editors are often the unsung heroes of the world of cinema, but in this case Boyle is a villain, and no mistake. You can't always blame an editor for the material, but given that an editor saved the original Star Wars from the hands of George Lucas, it's not unfair to say that Boyle applied too hard a hand to the editing, as much as Daldry probably storyboarded the film inanely. My main objection is the opening sequence, which is painful to watch. Instead of gently having the image of a flower vase put in our minds, subtly laying an image out for us to ponder, it's shoved at us, one shot after another, without finishing a scene. Lastly, I don't understand the reason why the cook is acting so pissed off in the wolf story. I mean, it really makes no sense of any kind. If you are such a lousy worker or you're so miserable, you'll probably be asked to leave anyway. With a cook like that, who wouldn't be miserable? But don't kill yourself, just hire a new cook. The Hours gets a 2 out of 5.